Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. Please excuse the weird winter lighting, warm, cool. It's just the time of year here in the Pacific Northwest. So I wanted to share with you today my wrap up for my 5-star predictions for 2024. I read 5 memoirs in this little grouping, and I can honestly say that I did enjoy all of them. Some of them more so than others, but there were no real duds in this. And she very much did it in that way that really good memoirs do. And that is, that really light touch of a mixture of the personal with the factual and more informational. And I think that was really the success of this for me. I was really compelled by her story. I was also compelled by the ideas she was bringing forth and the things that she was trying to talk about in terms of how the slave trade displaced so many people and created this sense of not belonging in either place. And I actually found it relatable, not because my ancestors were were victims of slavery in any way, but because in a settler culture, you are in a new place that wasn't where your ancestors originated from. And going back to that place where your ancestors did originate from doesn't mean that you are connected to those people. They are a whole different culture. They're a group of people that you are not connected to because your culture was transplanted and grew into something else. And so that's really explored in this book. But of course, specifically in relation to how disorienting it is when we're talking about the repercussions of slavery across generations. And I thought that Saidiya Hartman really conveyed that in a great way, her own personal feelings around it and her own personal struggles with that dichotomy for her. And I thought it was greatly conveyed, so really thought this one was well done. Birds Art Life by Maclear was the next one that I read. And I would say out of all 5 books, this is the one that I enjoyed the least. Not because it was a bad book. I did enjoy it and I'm glad I read it, and I thought there were interesting parts to this story. This is about Maclear's relationship with a birder, a man who teaches her about birding, brings her out into the urban atmosphere around Toronto, Ontario, teaches her about the birds. She learns about the birds, makes connections to birds, talks about birds. There's also illustrations in this one. And let me try to find a good illustration for you. And they're very kind of poetically, it's got a kind of vignette poetic feel to it as well, along with some different little informational tidbits. I didn't find I connected enough with the people in this one. There was a bit of distance, and there's some choices that she made in terms of the way she told the story that I didn't understand. And so it kept me at a distance a little bit from what she was trying to convey. But like I said, I am really glad I read it. I love birds, I love art, so it was an enjoyable memoir for me. I can't remember now which of these 2 that I read first, so I'm just going to go and tell you about The Stopping Places by Damian, A Journey Through Gypsy Britain. This was really interesting and educational for me. I do not know a lot about the Romani travelers in Britain, and Damian is from that from that tradition. And so he basically undertakes a journey where he is traveling around Britain to the different spots where the Romani communities would camp out. So there were many of these spots all around Britain. A lot of them have to do with different routes, different times of year, different jobs that the Romani people were doing. So working seasonally along these different routes, but also they were very much a horse culture. And so there's a lot of horse related fairs and sales and different things like that that would happen. And Damian is talking more about his grandmother's generation, because his mother's generation and subsequently him, they don't move around as much. They're a little bit more sedentary, living in communities rather than traveling around to work in the same way that previous generations had. And so you learn a lot about that in this book. You also learn about the Romani travelers as a class within Britain, and of course Britain is very class-based as a community, and so that was really interesting. And you just learn about his own personal family and relationship and his own journey and his kind of straddling of two cultures, and that he becomes a writer and he doesn't live a very traditional Romani lifestyle, and his coloring means that he doesn't fit in quite as well as some other people, and so he's questioned a lot about his culture. So he also goes to some different European Romani traveler gatherings in France and a couple other locations. I can't remember them now, but it was a really interesting memoir and very well put together. Vicki Laveau-Harvie's The Erratics was another memoir that I read, and this one was 5 stars as well. I really enjoyed this. This book, is about Vicki's and her sister's estranged relationship with their parents, and they are forced. Vicki lives in Australia and is forced to come back to Canada to deal with her parents, who are elderly and who are failing and who are very difficult to deal with because they have a lot of fears and suspicions, and they take that out on their kids, and their childhood was very difficult. And Vicki and her sister kind of approach things differently. They have a different view, obviously, of their childhood, but also they have a different view of how they should be approaching taking care of their parents. And so they kind of work through that together. And I just thought it was the perfect amount. Like, it's not a very long book. She deals very specifically with this situation while also weaving in some other things, like the past, maybe why she feels the way she feels about her mother, who is really the problem. Her and her father's relationship is not a problem, but her mother's very domineering and controls the family basically, and controls her father. And so, I'm really interested in family dynamics. I'm always very interested in bad mothers, in that, in fiction it can be a trope, I guess, but it's an interesting relationship I don't happen to have with my own mother, but just something that I know of friends who have. And so I do find that dynamic very compelling reading. It was very propulsive. I wanted to keep reading it. The only issue I had with this was kind of the epilogue, I think. I just thought that the epilogue was, the final chapter. It isn't an epilogue. The final chapter I just thought went a little bit off the rails for me in terms of the continuity of the rest of the story, but it wasn't weird enough to make it less than a 5-star for me. So I really, really enjoyed this one. And then finally, the one I just finished today is Waterfall of Stars, My 10 Years on the Island of Scomer by Roseanne Alexander. So Scomer is an island off of Wales. And I'm very sorry about the trucks you're hearing outside my window. So Waterfall of Stars is, I really enjoyed the book overall. Roseanne Alexander did some beautiful nature writing. And I think it was quite an amazing experience to have been able to read about Roseanne and her husband, Mike, moving to this island, living there for 10 years, living without electricity, without a lot of the amenities that we take for granted today. And this was in the 1970s that they lived there, basically. So almost the whole decade of the 1970s. She writes beautifully about all the birds. So it's a nature sanctuary, and they are basically the wardens of this island. And her and her husband live there year round, and they take care of the animal. Well, they monitor the animals. They do research and record what's happening with the animals. There were several oil spills that happened while they lived there, and so that was very fascinating because the oil spills were just devastating to the bird populations and the animal populations that were living on the island, and they talk a lot about that. She talked a lot about the seals. She was really enamored with the seals and her study of the seals, and so I learned a lot about seals that I didn't know, puffins, and lots of different other types of birds. My problem with the story is that I really didn't get to know Roseanne. She starts off the story with being young and in love with Mike, who is older than her. And she's like, he says he wants to go do this. The job possibility comes up, and he wants to apply, and he wants her to apply with him, and they're not married yet, so they have to get married to do this job and live on this island most of the time by themselves completely, except for being with the animals, being cut off from normal life. And she's very apprehensive, and she's really thinks, oh, well, we can apply because we're not going to get it. But then they do get it. And so it quickly kind of flip-flopped from her not wanting it and not really wanting to do it and feeling very reluctant to her being absolutely enamored with the idea and caught up in the idea and completely into it. And I found that she didn't do a good enough job for me explaining that change of heart, explaining her own internal dialogue with herself. I felt like she wrote this as some sort of a conduit, but didn't get through enough emotionally. Even though she shares things, she shares fears, she shares concerns, she shares observations, but there's just something lacking. I always felt distant from her. I didn't feel like enveloped in her story enough, and I don't know what that was. It lacked that kind of emotional connection for me. I also found it interesting that she was writing about a relationship dynamic, a very specific one, being that they were mostly isolated. And she wrote about her husband in a way that made a lot of his quirks very, and then he said this, and he told me I was dumb and that I didn't know how to do this, and I didn't know how to do it, and we got through it. And I was like, well, he's being a jerk, right? Like, there were often times where I thought he was a jerk, but I felt like I knew him better than I knew her, because I didn't really get a sense of who she was or what she wanted. At some point, she talks about how she made watercolor paintings, and this is like almost at the end of the book where she's talking about that she made watercolors of the animals. And I thought, why aren't you talking about that in the other parts of the book? And then she said that Mike was an amazing photographer and took these amazing photos. And guess what? There's no photos in this book. Okay, I feel like the publishing of this and the layout of this missed a mark here. If there should have been photos. There should have been at least, when they do in nonfiction books, they'll have those sections where they put multiple photos in the middle. I mean, this is the descriptions of nature that she writes here and of the animals are stunning, but we get no visual aid to that. The only picture we get is this picture of her on the back, which obviously was taken, when they were there when she was young, because she was 20 in the 1970s, so she's not that age now. This was published in 2017. So I just feel like I don't understand why the book didn't have photos included, and I don't understand why the book was laid out the way it was. I think the editing could have been done better. You basically just have chapter breaks. There's 18 chapters, and it just reads, and also the text in this book is ridiculously small font, which is it's a really uncomfortable thing to read font that small. It's just not, I mean, I have great eyes. I don't have to wear glasses or anything. And I still think that font is way too small for comfort, for ease of reading. So, you know, this is probably a very small press that produced this book. And I understand that they were probably trying to keep the cost down or something like that. But when you have a story like this that is really quite incredible, you want it to be done really well. And so that would, for me, would have included a bit more of an edit. So taking out some of the parts of the book that were, there just seemed to be parts that didn't flow as well in her train of thought for me. So she'd be talking about the seals and oil, and then she'd switch over to birds for a while, and then she'd eventually at the end of the chapter go back to the seals. I felt like it could have been edited better where you had certain sections fit well together. She also kind of does a year per chapter, but then it was like, well, why didn't you say like year 1 and put the dates or something like that? There needed to be a bit more of a structural change for me to make the book more enjoyable. So as lovely as the nature writing was and as interesting as her story was, I just felt like some of the parts of this book that let me down were, like I said, the structure, lack of photos, and kind of this, you know this is a visual thing. Like, you're living on this beautiful island. There's like descriptions of bluebells. There's all these descriptions. Even if the photos were in black and white, it really would have evoked, given more of a sense and maybe even more of a connection to the story to have those things included in this book. So this was probably a 4-star for me. It was a 4-star because like the writing was quite good. There was also at least 4 or 5 typos, which feels like, those are small details. Those are just like, proofreading is so important, so more proofreading, a little bit better of an edit, a little bit better of an arrangement of the way the book flowed, and some photos would have really probably would have made it a 5-star for me, other than that lack of connection that I felt to her. I was really disappointed that I really didn't understand her. And even at the end, when she was talking about, animal conservation and preserving the island and where they live now, she's never gone back to the island since they left, but her husband has. And I don't know, I just felt like there should have been more. I should have understood what it was about her that was so all or nothing about the situation, and why she can't go back, and what it is she's trying to say about that. And like, there was just some missing emotional kind of links for me in this story. So that is Waterfall of Stars. I think I still would recommend it. It's still a great story, but going into it, just be aware that those are the things that that you will have to, maybe they don't bother you, maybe small font doesn't bother you. It definitely bothers me. But yeah, those are the things that came up for me when I was reading. So those are my 5-star predictions for 2024. Very happy with them. Very glad I read all these books. I actually owned all of these books, so I was really happy to get them read off of my shelves. And I am going to be doing a 5-star predictions for 2025, except it's going to be a little bit different in format this year. So you can expect the TBR for the 5-star predictions for 2025 sometime in January, maybe even February, because I do have a crazy January coming up. If I believe you are watching this, if you're watching it on publishing day, on New Year's Eve day. So Happy New Year's to you all, and I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.